Okay, now in watercolor, I'd like to talk about using water as a barrier and also how to use it for backgrounds. When you're doing a composition and it's fairly formal, it's a good idea to put your background in first. If the background's very loose and just a few little brush strokes, that's one thing. If you're actually trying to paint the background, I would suggest that you draw out your images and then you do your background. On this one, you can see, it's the three apples in a book, still life. If you put in the apples in the book and then you're trying to get a background down to it, it's going to be tough. You're going to have white lines around it. You're going to end up with places where you went too far and you got black, or you got your background color on the objects themselves. When you put in the background, then it's a lot easier to paint the objects to it. It's just interesting that way. When you're using water to move your background around, now this one I really didn't do it that well. I started off with just the gray paint, and you can see a lot of strokes. It doesn't bother me too much, but it would have been interesting if I put down a bed of water instead. This is just a very small little still life of two pears. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my brush with clean, clear water, and I'm going to start laying down the water right up to the piece and to where I want the background to go. And you have to work fairly rapidly or else everything starts to dry and then you get splotchy spots. So sometimes it helps to have a larger brush, especially if you're working on a large surface. But this one will work for this. What happens is when you start adding color to this, the color will follow the water. It'll just kind of swim in that pool of water that you have. But as soon as it hits a dry spot, it stops. And that's what makes it really nice so that you can control it. Okay, I'm going to go over this a little bit because this is where I started. I want to make sure that I don't have a dry spot. And at this point, I'm going to switch to a broader brush. And anywhere I want the color to go, I have to make sure there's water there, or else I'll leave a big, dry, white highlight, like right there. Okay. So now what I'm going to do is I want something that complements the pears. So I'm going to start with some yellow. Okay, I'm going to start with yellow, and as I put the yellow down, the water's going to carry it around. I'm using yellow because it'll complement the light green of the pear. And if I want, I can add a little bit of green to it. And if my light's coming this way, then I'll probably darken this corner over here a little bit with just a touch of green. Once again, I just let the water kind of spread it. And if I want, I can add a little bit more water to it. It can make some interesting patterns. Now, what I like about this is there is no background color in the object itself. So that was my goal. Okay. Now, when this dries, now I can come back in and paint either the foreground here, might be the next thing I do, let that dry, then come in and start working on the objects themselves. When you're working with landscapes, this is a great way to do your sky and everything else. When you look at the sky, it's always darker the higher you go up. As the sky reaches the horizon, you'll notice that it tends to turn gray and lighter. And that's one of the reasons why is when you're looking up high, you're looking through less and less atmosphere. And so as the earth is rounded, and as you're looking across, you're looking through more atmosphere, more dust, all these things. So anyway, it's nice to make the top a little bit more intense, a little darker. Now, we live in an area with amazing topography. Utah has 5 national parks. They call them the Big Five. And then we have additional national monuments. And so if you've ever hiked through Arches, through Canyonlands, through Zions, any of these places, it's just amazing rock formations. And so what I've done is I picked something that has a monolith sandstone peak in it. And so I'm going to put in the background to that. So once again, I'm going to come in with my clean water, and I'll just come right along my horizon, and I'm going to paint that clear water on, and then make sure that the entire surface is covered. Go ahead. Okay, so I've now covered all that area that I want for my sky with water. So now I'm going to come along, I'm going to start adding blue. This is phthalo blue. I may have a little bit more water than I really needed. But one of the things that I can do is once I get my pigment down, I can then tilt the piece and let everything run in certain directions. So what I'm going to do now, I need to get some pigment here. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to tilt my paper up. I'm going to let everything run. Now I can also take a paper towel and start blotting, just letting it absorb. And this is the paper towel from the school that comes on a big, huge roll. And it's not nearly as absorbent as what you'll find in your kitchen paper towels. So I like those better. Now the other thing that you can do, okay, here's some tissues, is I can come in here and I can start blotting things out. If I want to have clouds, I can do things, create imagery through just simply blotting out and absorbing some of that pigment. Now at this point I can also start adding other colors in. For instance, if I want it to look like that hour of the day when the sun's starting to set, I can start adding just a little bit of oranges or reds down here. And let that blend in also. So those are just some of the things that you can do with a water barrier. It keeps it away from your subject matter, gives you a chance to create skies or backgrounds or anything that you want to do with that. Okay, so play around with it, have fun, and you'll get to a point where it's better just to let it sit there and dry, but you can put something under it so it's tilted up a bit, and that'll bring all of your heavy pigments to one end, and because your paper is textured, it'll also leave an interesting pattern because the pigment will rest in some of those depressions and create quite an interesting pattern. And at this point, I'm just going to let this dry and see what I end up with. So when you're doing this project, use the paper that's about 11 by 7.5, and the subject matter can be anything that you want as long as it has a place for you to use this as a background and that you're using it as a barrier. And so when you're doing this, since all your projects will be varied, make sure that you write on the back what the project is. So it'll be backgrounds and barriers. And see what you can do, see if it helps you in giving you another tool when you're creating your project.